Imagine a world suspended in the breath of an instant, a silent basilica, hearts beating in everywhere of the globe, and a small column of smoke rising toward his sky, carrying with it the hopes, the fears and prophecies of an entire civilization. What if I told you that the fate of over 1 billion souls is about to be decided in his biggest secret after doors sealed in a hidden corner of the heart of Rome? This is not simply a religious succession. This is a moment that could redefine the course of human history. April 2025. After the death of the Pope, the Apostolic See becomes vacant. There is no spiritual leader, no supreme voice of the Church. The world watches expectantly while time seems to stop before a ritual that combines the divine and the human, the eternal and the fragile. But this time, something is different. Internal tensions, crisis global, the forgotten prophecies and the forces invisible converge in a same point, the Conclave. Not only was it elected a man, it will be decided direction of an institution millennial that still influences in the consciences, in the governments and in world culture. Under the majestic frescoes of the Sistine Chapel, the cardinals will not only carry cassocks and mitres, they will carry with them secret alliances, silent pressures, and the weight of centuries of history. In every whispered vow, in every exchanged glance, in every silent prayer, a battle will be fought. Invisible among the faith, the ambition and destiny. Who will be elected? A conservative who will protect the tradition, a progressive who pushes for profound reforms, or a moderate capable of uniting two worlds in conflict? And beyond, what dangers, what scandals, what challenges will face new pontiff in an increasingly uncertain global scenario? On this journey, we will delve into the secret rites, we will explore the forbidden backstage and unravel the networks of power that are woven in the shadows of the Vatican. Because understanding the 2025 Conclave is not just about understanding a process ancient, it is to look into the abyss of our own future. Get ready. You are about to enter one of the most fascinating and decisive mysteries of our time. Rome dawned wrapped in a heavy, almost unreal atmosphere. The bells of St. Peter's rang out with a funereal cadence, while thousands of faithful gathered in the square. They cried in silence. The successor of Peter had departed. The Apostolic See was vacant. In the papal apartments, the protocol followed its relentless course. The Cardinal Camerlengo, dressed in his black cassock trimmed with red piping, approached the Pope's lifeless body. With a silver hammer, gently tapped his forehead 3 times and pronounced his name, baptismal. There was no answer. With solemnity, the Camerlengo officially declared the death of the pontiff. He retired the ring of the fisherman, symbol of papal power, and in a gesture loaded with centuries of meaning, was destroyed before witnesses to prevent any attempt to falsify documents during the interregnum period. The announcement spread like wildfire. Fires around the world, news agencies interrupted their broadcasts, leaders of all the nations they sent condolences. But in the heart of the church, the pain was mixed with urgency unavoidable. It had to begin the transition process. The vacant see, that time strange in which the church sails without his helmsman, is one of the most delicate and symbolic periods of Catholicism. The Apostolic Constitution Universi Dominici Gregis, promulgated by John Paul II and adjusted by his successors, dictates every step to follow, from the mourning of 9 days until the meticulous preparations for the conclave. Meanwhile, St. Peter's Basilica was transformed in a shrine of mourning. The lines of pilgrims seemed endless, moving slowly to yield tribute to the body of the Pope exposed before the altar of the confession. Many, they cried openly. Others, they prayed, prostrate, searching in silence answers your deepest fears. But after the curtains of the liturgy and the devotion, they moved more subtle gears. The Camerlengo temporarily assumed the government from the Vatican, ensuring the administration ordinary, but prohibited explicitly to innovate or alter the structure of the Church. As a guardian between 2 eras, His mission was to preserve, not transform. Meanwhile, the cardinals began to arrive in Rome from the most remote corners of the planet. Each one brought with him hopes, alliances, ambitions, and in their hands rested the future of an institution millennial. They would stay in the house of Santa Marta under a solitary confinement, strict in preparation for one of the most enigmatic rituals of the humanity. In the streets of the Eternal City, the Romans spoke in a low voice, with a mixture of respect and anxiety. What kind of pope would emerge from this conclave? Would it be a restorer of old glories or a bold renovator willing to face the challenges of the 21st century? Meanwhile, in the Vatican corridors, they whispered to each other names. There was speculation about political, theological, and cultural affinities. Some they remembered that, in the history, the periods of vacant seat not always were times of peace. There were times when those that the ambition, intrigue, and even the hunger forced the cardinals to choose hurriedly to a new leader. Now, however, the weight of the modern times added new layers of complexity: scandals, financial, internal divisions, the crisis of faith in West, the religious persecution in other parts of the world. Death of the Pope, not only there was open empty in Peter's throne, there was left all the things exposed cracks, hopes and fears that lay beneath the surface of a church struggling to find its place in a changing world. In this scenario, full of history, mystery, and expectation, the destiny of the church, and perhaps of the whole world, hung by a thread. While the city cried and church whole it seemed contain he breath, a man quietly assumed one of the most critical roles in the transition, the Camerlengo. Kevin Joseph Farrell, Cardinal Camerlengo, was not a name acquaintance outside of ecclesiastical circles. However, in this sacred interregnum, he became in he temporary guardian of the spiritual heritage of St. Peter. With her serene gaze and her firm step, Farrell represented the archetype of the guardian, the one who watches over the legacy while the future is yet to be written. His first actions after the death of the Pope were invisible to the majority, but essential for the continuity of the Church. Supervised the authentication of the death, the sealing of the papal apartments, and the beginning of the logistical preparation for the conclave. Under his responsibility also fell the prudent management of the property of the Holy See, ensuring that nothing would be altered in a time of potential chaos. The Camerlengo does not exercise spiritual power nor redefine doctrines. His authority is administrative and symbolic. However, its role is absolutely strategic. In the shadow, while the cardinals are still preparing for the choice, it's him who maintains the fragile balance of the church orphaned by her shepherd. Every day, Farrell met with the three cardinals' assistants, chosen to support him in the tasks of the sede vacante. Together, they organized the funerals. They coordinated the security and watched over the compliance strict of the rituals established since centuries. Any deviation, any mistake. At this time of transition, it could open cracks in the legitimacy of the next pontificate. In parallel, Farrell ensured the purity of the process, ordered reviews of the communications, guaranteed the total disconnection from the cardinals from the outside world during the conclave, and supervised the preparation of the Sistine Chapel, making sure that there was no intrusions, neither leaks. But the role of the Camerlengo was not free of tension. From the shadows, political and ecclesiastical forces tried to influence, slip messages, suggest names. Farrell had to keep unbreakable, a rock in the middle of a stormy sea. Every decision he made, every measure he implemented, was imbued with a greater purpose: to safeguard the neutrality and purity of the conclave. In his hands rested not only the logistical order of the Vatican, but the confidence of millions of believers who looked towards Rome, seeking a sign of stability and continuity. While the lights of the city from the Vatican shone in the Roman night, Farrell walked the silent corridors of the Apostolic Palace. Alone, thoughtful, he knew that his mission was not to shine, but to sustain the weight of an eternal institution in one of its most fragile moments. The Camerlengo would not be remembered in the stained glass windows, nor canonized in the altars. But without their silent custody, the choice of the new pope would be vulnerable to forces that have nothing sacred. In the days that followed, his discreet surveillance would become a foundation invisible on the which would be erected the future of the Church. When the last echo of the funeral ceremonies became extinct in the vaults of St. Peter's, a new energy began to tour the hallways from the Vatican. It was the silent expectation of the Conclave, a rite so ancient as mysterious, a choreography perfect where every movement is imbued with meaning and secrecy. Cardinals under 80 years, the only ones with right to vote, began to gather in the house of Santa Marta. It was not an ordinary hotel. During the conclave, was transformed in a spiritual and physical fortress. Each room was assigned by lottery to email suspicion of prior alliances. Communication with the outside world was strictly prohibited. Without phones, mobile phones, without emails, without contacts beyond the Vatican walls. Each cardinal I knew that when crossing the gates of Santa Marta, leaving their previous life behind. Now they were princes of the Church, summoned to a sacred act where the humanity I had to open up to the divine inspiration. But also they knew that among them they moved strategies invisible. The Sistine Chapel, prepared for the occasion, it was the beating heart of this ritual. Under the imposing gaze of the Michelangelo's Last Judgment stood rows of simple tables, each with paper, a pen, and a bronze ballot box. No ostentation, just the pure solemnity of the moment. Before the official start, Vatican technicians specialized in counterintelligence. They thoroughly inspected every corner of the place. They were looking for hidden devices, microphones, any attempt at interference. Everything had to be sealed under one commandment: absolute secrecy. The ceremony of entering the conclave was both grand and intimate. Each cardinal swore, with the hand on the gospel, keep total confidentiality regarding everything that would happen. Extra omnes, he shouted the master of ceremonies, and all non-electors, they abandoned the chapel, leaving only those invested with the terrible and sacred duty of choosing the new vicar of Christ. There was a tension in the air, almost physical in the air, as if the frescoes themselves contained he-breath. The dynamics of the conclave is slow and rigorous. 2 votes for the morning, 2 in the afternoon. Each cardinal writes your candidate in a special paper, folding it carefully before depositing it in the ballot box. Then the votes are counted out loud, one by one, under the watchful eye of everyone. If it is not reached the 2/3 majority, votes are burned mixed with chemical compounds to produce the characteristic black smoke that rises from the chimney of the Sistine Chapel, visible to all those waiting anxiously in St. Peter's Square. Each black cloud of smoke is a collective sigh of disappointment, a call to action, perseverance. As they pass by the days, tensions rise. Discreet conversations in brief moments of rest, subtle gestures, meaningful glances, everything can tip the scales. Some cardinals, they look for consensus. Others, they maneuver silently to make their candidate prevail. There is no shortage who, since the start, they position themselves as papabili, the favorites. But the history of the conclave teaches that many times he who enters as pope leaves as cardinal. Some younger cardinals, they speak in a low voice of reforms, of openness. Others, older, remember the need to preserve the tradition in an increasingly hostile world, the faith. In this melting pot of visions, cultures, and languages, each vote is not just a personal decision. It is an act of faith and politics, inseparably intertwined. The outside world watches, speculates, creates favorites lists. But within those walls, only silence reigns, broken only by the words solemn of the rite and the crackling of the chimney. And while the shadows of the Sistine Chapel lengthen with the passage of the days, a question burns in the heart of every cardinal. Will I be perhaps called to bear the weight of the tiara? There, under the Michelangelo's vault, not only is one decided name, it is measured the spiritual pulse of an entire era. Outside, in the vast esplanade of St. Peter's Square, the crowd remained in vigil, day after day, eyes elevations toward the same small chimney, waiting for a sign, a signal from the heavens. The smoke had turned into his sacred language of the uncertainty. Every time the black smoke emerged, thick and dark, a murmur of disappointment was walking the square like a whisper of wind. There was no agreement. The world had to wait. Patience, an increasingly scarce virtue in the modern era, was put to the test under the skies of Rome. Inside the Sistine Chapel, the dynamic was relentless. Voting, praying, waiting. Glances laden with meaning, faint sighs, the invisible tensions of souls torn between theological convictions and political strategies. The black smoke not only represented an unfinished process, it was a mirror of the human complexity, of the dilemmas they faced. The cardinals. Bet on the stability or by the renewal. Choose safe orthodoxy or audacity necessary. And then, when nobody at I expected, when tiredness and the hope they seemed have melted into resignation, it happened. A column of white smoke, at first shy, almost dubious, as if the spirit it will take a moment to confirm your decision. Then firmer, rising clearly towards a blue sky. Stifled scream emerged from the crowd, followed by applause, tears, prayers. The bells of St. Peter's rang out in all its splendor, carrying the news to the most remote corners of the city and the world. Habemus Papam. In that moment, the borders they disappeared. It didn't matter. The language, the nationality, the age or the ideology. Humanity, in his infinite diversity, shared a moment of profound unity. Behind the still closed curtain, the new pope accepted his choice with a mixture of humility and trembling. He would soon step out onto the balcony to introduce himself to the world. A name would be pronounced. A new era would begin. But for now, only white smoke dominated his sky, like an ancient symbol of renewal, of hope, and of that mysterious pact between the man and the divine that century after century is reborn in the heart of Rome. At first glance, the conclave is a purely spiritual act. Men of faith gathered under the sign of the prayer, seeking the divine inspiration to choose the next successor of Peter. But under that sacred surface, latent currents much more human. Currents of power, of ambition, of silent strategies that weave a web invisible of influences. Since times ancient, the conclaves have been battlefields subtle, where not only theological visions clash, but also political, economic, and geostrategic interests. Although the cardinals are isolated from the outside world, their convictions, their loyalties, and their networks of relationships do not disappear when they cross the doors of the House of Santa Marta. They exist. The calls clicks. Informal groups of cardinals who share a vision common or strategic interests. They are not political parties, but they act as such, negotiating support, exchanging veiled promises, seeking to build a majority invisible before the first voting. Some cliques, they advocate a reformist pope, capable of adapting the church to the challenges of the modernity, secularization, loss of vocations, scandals financial. Others they fight to preserve doctrinal orthodoxy, resisting any change that might dilute the eternal message of the Catholic faith. Geography. It also matters. Cardinals from Africa, Asia, and Latin America seek to increase the influence of their churches, young and vibrant, while European sectors they try keep its traditional influence, aware that its relevance decreases in an increasingly multipolar world. Tension arises even deeper. The division between those who see the church as an immovable spiritual fortress and those who they conceive it as a field hospital, open, dynamic, ready to get dirty hands in the mud of the modern world. During the breaks allowed between votes, in the discreet corridors of Santa Marta, or in the glances shared during frugal meals, are woven agreements. Not explicit, not recorded, but real. A nod, A whisper in Latin, a hand on the shoulder, minimal gestures that seal alliances that will change the course of the conclave. History records extreme examples. In the conclave of 1268, the cardinals, they took a long time, almost 3 years in, choose a pope, locked up in increasingly desperate conditions, to the point that the civil authorities reduced the ceiling of the palace to force them to decide. Since then, rules have been tightened to prevent similar deadlocks. However, the tension between divine inspiration and human maneuver has never disappeared. Still today, the Holy Spirit is solemnly invoked, but even the holiest among the voters recognize that the human decisions are imperfect, marked by the weight of the concerns temporary. The new pope will not be elected in an empty. It will be the result of delicate balances between tradition and renewal, between the Church's young people and ancient, among the expectations of the faithful and the internal governance needs. In the days of conclave, Rome becomes in a chessboard invisible, where every movement it must be calculated, every word weighed. It's not an open war, but a struggle of ideas, hopes, and fears. While the world is anxiously awaiting the advertisement of the new pontiff, within the Vatican walls, a silent battle is being fought between the pure spirituality and the inevitable realities of human politics. A battle that will define not only the new pope, but the face same as the Catholic Church for future generations. With each vote failed, the battle lines within the conclave became clearer. Already, it wasn't just a matter of prayer. It was a dance. Complex of strategies, where the names were beginning to stand out among the murmurs from the Sistine Chapel. 3 figures emerged as main contenders, each embodying a distinct vision of the future of the Church. Robert Serra, the Guinean cardinal with a stern face and fiery words, stood out as the champion of the conservatives. Staunch defender of the liturgical tradition, of immutable morality, was seen by many as the necessary restorer for times of confusion, doctrinal. His ascetic charisma attracted the cardinals, eager for a pope who would confront the modern world with the strength of the ancient martyrs. But not everyone wanted to look back. At the other end of the spectrum, Mateo Zufa, Cardinal of Mozambique, emerged as the face of the ecclesial progressivism. Advocate of profound reforms in the structure from the Vatican, the opening towards new family models and a more politically committed church, Zufa represented the wind of change that many, especially those from the churches of the global south, they longed for. Between the two extremes, a third figure stood, Peter Turkson, a Ghanaian, moderate, conciliatory, a man of bridges, of interreligious dialogue, committed both to the doctrine as with the social justice. For many, Turkson embodied the possibility of joining the divided wings of the Church in a critical moment. The cliques operated untiringly around these names. A group of cardinals, Europeans and North Americans, quietly pushed to push Serra forward, fearful that excessive openness would further fragment the faithful. Meanwhile, cardinals Latin Americans, Africans and Asians, eager for a more representative voice, adapted to their challenges. Locals favored Zufa or Turkson, and in middle of the human maneuvers resonated ancient prophecies. The most superstitious could not help but remember the list of Saint Malachi, that enigmatic succession of Latin mottos that, since the 12th century, there would have been foretold the name and characteristics of each pope. According to some interpreters, the next pontiff would be the last, Petrus Romanus, under whose mandate great tribulations would come. Was it a coincidence that a cardinal named Peter Turkson was among the favorites? The whispers were increasing. Some they saw in, "This is an ominous sign," others a simple one, medieval superstition, but the symbolic weight was undeniable. Every choice, every alliance, every maneuver was charged with an apocalyptic echo that put the nerves on edge. Beyond the prophecies, the challenges royals who were waiting for the new pope were huge. Scandals financial followed, shaking the bowels of the Vatican. The abuse crisis had not disappeared, undermining the moral credibility of the institution. The exodus of vocations in Europe and North America left dioceses empty and silent temples. Internal tensions between traditionalists and progressives threatened with fracture even more so, unit of the Church. And as if that were not enough, the global scenario presented threats growing: wars, religious persecutions, the galloping secularization, the emergence of ideologies that saw in the faith a vestige outdated and dispensable. In this context, the election of a pope was not a simple change of leadership. It was a declaration of intent to the entire world. Resist, adapt, transform. The cardinals, they knew they were not choosing only to one man. They chose he, face of the Church, for a generation whole, perhaps for the final chapter of his history, if the prophecies they should believe. Every vote they cast in the urn was an act of faith and calculation, a whisper between fear and hope. And while the Sistine Chapel continued wrapped in prayers, intrigues and silent decisions, there outside, millions of souls waited, knowing, without know it, that the course of his faith, of their culture, of their world, depended on those small sheets of paper sealed under the imposing fresco of the final judgment. In the white smoke that would come, not only would see he face of a new pope, they would see reflected their own hopes, their fears, and perhaps the first glimpse of a future no one dared to fully imagine. White smoke had already been dissipated, but its meaning still vibrated in the heart of millions. The new pope, dressed in his simple cassock white, appeared in a central balcony of St. Peter's Basilica. It's his serene face, his trembling hand raised in greeting, were enough to bring tears to the eyes of many of those gathered in the square, already the millions who they saw through screens in every corner of the world. However, after that image of unity, what awaited the new pontiff was a storm. The Catholic Church was not, at that time, an impregnable fortress. It was a ship tossed by furious winds, scandals, financial still unresolved wounds opened by sexual abuse, internal divisions that seemed unbridgeable chasms. Each of these challenges were enough to consume a pontificate. Together, they represented a test like few others in the history. In addition, the world that received had changed. Secularization in Europe and North America was advancing inexorably, emptying temples, relativizing values. In other regions, the faith grew, yes, but under conditions of brutal persecution or extreme poverty. The voice of the Church. She had to be firm, but also wise. She had to shout prophecies into the desert and at the same time, whisper comfort in half of the pain. The new pope would have to be many things at once: pastor and diplomat, guardian of the faith and bridge builder, spiritual leader and skilled crisis manager. He would have to confront a culture that, to a large extent, considered irrelevant or, worse still, enemy. And so, not counting internal tensions, one wing pushed for radical reforms: priesthood feminine, revision of sexual morality, total openness to new family realities. Another sector called for a return to doctrinal purity, a firm resistance against all forms of modernism. How to reconcile the irreconcilable. In addition, the faithful, they were crying out for transparency, for a church that would leave behind centuries of secrets and cronyism. They wanted shepherds who smelled like sheep, as they were saying a previous pope, not locked up princes in palaces golden. In every gesture, in every word, in every decision, the new pope would walk on a razor's edge. No less disturbing was the weight of the prophecies. For many, the fact that the new pope had symbolic links with the predictions of Saint Malachi were more than a curiosity. It was a sign. Would it be the last one? Would they come times of great tribulation? He same. In his first blessing, Urbi et Orbi seemed to allude to the difficulties that would come. He spoke of mercy, yes, but also of the cross, of sacrifice, of the need not to fear in the face of evidence. It was a call, not to the comfort, but to the endurance. So, while the bells continued resonating in Rome and the crowds were slowly dispersing, a new era was beginning, uncertain, challenging, potentially glorious, or catastrophic era. The new pope, alone in his chambers, night, maybe he raised his gaze towards the celestial vault, searching in silence an answer. I didn't know what the future would bring, but I knew that past whatever happens, I wouldn't walk alone, because in every corner of the world there was who, in silence, prayed for him. And in every beat of that prayer was born the hope that even in the darkest night, the light would not be defeated. In Rome, the light seemed brighter that night. It wasn't just the electricity that illuminated the streets' cobblestones, but an intangible spark, the spark of a new hope, the promise of a future yet to be written. White smoke, it was already history. The name of the new pope resonated in all the languages and in all corners of the planet. But the real question was just beginning to form in the hearts of the faithful. Will this be the shepherd who will lead the church through the wind's hurricanes of the 21st century? Or will it be the herald in voluntary times even darker? Because in white smoke is not only chosen as a man, it is decided course of souls, of cultures, of generations whole. It has defined the eternal battle between the faith and oblivion, between the hope and the despair. The new pope carries now on his shoulders the invisible weight of centuries of history, of silent martyrdoms, of dreams not yet realized. Every word you speak, every gesture you make, every silence you keep, will shape the face of a church that fights for not be just memory, but a living presence in a world that is changing faster than ever. But that burden is not only his, it is also our, because every believer, every seeker of the true, every soul that still looks up to heaven asking, what's the point of all this, is part of this story, in motion. And you, who have accompanied this journey up to here, you are an essential part of that shared destiny. So now I ask you that you believe you. Will this be the one beginning of a new bright chapter, or the prelude to a spiritual apocalypse? Leave us your opinion in the comments. Your voice matters, your reflection account. And if this history has you made vibrate, if it has awakened in you questions or certainties that you thought were forgotten, do not hesitate in subscribe to our channel and share this video with who still they look for answers in half of the mystery, because the mystery is still alive. And together, perhaps, we can discover his true